Hello and welcome to Curiosity Cake. I'm your host, Lee Delaney. On this episode, I'm talking to health tech pioneer, author and self-confessed troublemaker Kirsten Karchmer. Kirsten is a world-renowned specialist in women's health, menstruation and fertility. For over 20 years, she has pioneered new strategies that improve women's cycles, fertility and overall health by integrating the best of conventional reproductive medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, and the science of incremental behaviour change. As always, hit the subscribe button, rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser and Good Pods, and follow me on Twitter and Instagram. But for now, get yourself a cup of tea, grab a fork and dig into a slice of curiosity cake. Curiosity Cake. Kirsten, welcome to Curiosity Cake. It's really good to have you.
Thank you. We've been talking for a while, so I'm glad to finally get to sit down and have a conversation.
Yeah, it's really good. And I should shout out my friend Jen, who, when I first started talking to you a little while ago about coming on the podcast, she was really interested in this topic. So hi, Jen, and I hope this will be really useful for you. So if we start off, Kirsten, you really specialize in kind of women's health, particularly in menstrual cycle. So can you tell us a bit about what got you interested in that particular area and how your path came to lead you to that topic?
Oh, yeah, sure. So, when I was a teenager and a young woman, I was a competitive athlete. So I was a really physical person. And when I was around 19 years old, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And I couldn't walk anymore without a cane. I went to every doctor, and basically they said my only option was to, take pretty serious medication for the rest of my life. And none of those had any longitudinal studies. And I just felt really nervous about it. And I hadn't really thought about anything around any alternative approaches. But through push and shove of one of my friends, she took me to an acupuncturist. And I was so suspicious. I told her, I said, going to an acupuncturist is like going to a psychic.
Yeah.
I said, that's just like a complete scam artistry. I was such a jerk. And I go in and I hid my cane and I hid my chart, and this Chinese man came in and really soft spoken. He started feeling my pulse. And he said, really quickly, he says, "Oh, you're so tired." Mm-hmm. And I looked at him with a very jerky 20-year-old face. And I was like, whatever, everybody's tired. It's kind of like when you go to the psychic and they're like, I see a man, like my dead father. Yeah. And then he sits there for a few more minutes and he says, "Oh, you cannot digest food." And that really was true. I just had such bad digestive problems. And I said, okay, well, that's true. And then he sits there a few more minutes and he looks up at me, and it's like a long pregnant pause. And he goes, "Do you have muscle weakness?" Mm-hmm. And I was like, "Yeah, I have multiple sclerosis. How did you know that?" And he starts clapping. He's like clapping. He says, "That makes perfect sense." And I said, "What are you talking about? Like tired, digestive problems, and muscle weakness?" And he says, "Look, we've been feeling pulses for 5,000 years. Imagine if you played guitar for 5,000 years or 500 years or 500 hours." He's like, you become very intimate with the changes in your strings. So if somebody tightened the strings or changed your strings or did anything to your strings, you would notice the subtle differences. And that's what I was just doing. And what I noticed is that the pulse, where we identify sort of the functionality of digestion, is empty, which means you feel a pulse above it and below it. This is on your wrist, and nothing in the middle. And he says, what that tells me is that you can't turn energy into food. And if you can't you can't turn food into energy. And if you can't turn food into energy, you can't make blood. And if you can't make blood, you can't nourish the neuromuscular system. And I was like, that's exactly how I feel. I just felt like I never could get fuel into the cells efficiently. And he said, our job, because when you were born, you had MS, but your body was really strong. And he said, but then you trained 8 hours a day since you were 6 years old, trained and trained and trained. And at some point, your disease got stronger than your body. And that was probably around 18 years old. Our job is to go back and make your body stronger than your disease. And I was like, that actually does make perfect sense. And that day I became an acupuncturist. I mean, I started just studying Chinese medicine that day. And
Wow.
I set off I was teaching, I had a job in like 3 months that I was a linguist at the time, and I had taken a job teaching at Seoul National University for the next year. So
Hmm.
I went to Korea for a year. I studied Chinese medicine there, not formally, informally, and then came back and did a postgraduate program in traditional Chinese medicine. And during acupuncture college, in Chinese medicine, every single thing that you can imagine has a clinical and diagnostic significance, even all the way down. It's like I get a twitch on my arm at 3 o'clock every single day. That tells us something. That means something,
Hmm.
where it is and what the twitch is and how long, And, and with the menstrual cycle, every detail, the color of the blood, the volume of the blood, the clotting, the kinds of PMS, the duration, cervical discharge, the length of the cycle, all of those things are robustly diagnostic. And I became obsessed with the menstrual cycle.
Hmm.
And I always joke and say I'm probably like one of 3 people on the planet that's ever said that. But I really stopped wanting to treat men because I kept saying, but they don't menstruate. I don't have enough diagnostic information. And so what's nice about the menstrual cycle is that we can use it diagnostically to understand it's the check engine light of a
Yes.
woman's body, person with a period's body. And so we can use it diagnostically, but then when we deliver an intervention, we can use it as the feedback loop. So we're like, okay, we think there's these 3 problems. We're going to intervene, and then we're going to watch and see what happens to the menstrual cycle next month. Does the volume of blood change? Does the color? Does the clotting? Does the cramping? All those things. So it's a long intro, but it really gives the context of like where the passion for all of this insight comes from.
Yeah, I love that story. You've literally gone from skeptic to, practitioner. So it's a real journey of conversion there, isn't it?
Yes, for sure. Yes, I was completely skeptical. I was just like, this is complete garbage. That's just, yeah.
Well, acupuncture is a really funny one because I think it really gets packaged up along with, all the kind of wacky energy healing and psychics and things like that. But actually, if you look at like Korea, China, Japan, acupuncture has a robust kind of evidence base, and it's actually used in like hospitals and things.
Yeah, I mean, in China, if you go to the hospital, there's on half of the hospital is the traditional Chinese medicine hospital, and half of the hospital is Western medicine. And you might have a surgery, but you might get a drip of IV herbs after it or before
Hmm.
it. Or if you're getting chemotherapy, you're going to be seeing the acupuncturist and the herbalist to help manage the side effects of the chemotherapy. And to me, that's the beginning of real integrative medicine.
And you've become, as you're saying, like a real student of the menstrual cycle, and you actually have a book called Seeing Red that's about the menstrual cycle, but particularly kind of focuses on the kind of difficulties that women can have with it. And you make the argument that they don't have to have and suffer through those difficulties.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, you know, the research shows that about 80%, this is shocking to me, but that about 80% of people with periods experience life interrupting menstrual issues every single month. And the first time that I read that, I was flabbergasted because here I'm, like considered a world renowned expert in integrative women's health. And I didn't even know that
Yeah.
because I was mostly for the first part of my career focused on fertility. And because menstrual problems are highly correlated with longer times of conception, every person who came to my clinic, like 10,000 women I served, they all had terrible periods. So, I was just like, well, this is just a correlation because they're infertile also. And so when I saw, the data, I thought, wow, we're in the middle of a women's movement. How can we actually make any progress forward when 80% of women are sick every single month and literally nobody's talking about this?
Mm-hmm.
It's even funny, with the blood clot issue with the COVID vaccination. It's so funny because I think the incidence of blood clot was 1 in 100,000, but the incidence of blood clot and birth control pills is 1 in 10,000, and nobody talked about that.
Right.
It's like here you're going to ban a vaccine for 1 in 100,000, and we regularly 35% of menstruating women are on oral contraceptives.
Yeah, and those are some really shocking statistics, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, to put it mildly.
Yeah, well, I think it speaks to, this is, I think, part of like where I am my focus of my work now is really to sort of bring this conversation to the forefront at every single opportunity I can get, because the more that we talk about it, almost every person, like every podcast that I'm on, every interview, you can see the interviewer has this aha moment, like, this is really important. We should be talking about this, whether we're male or female.
So the book has really interesting chapter in there that's looking at the history around the language that we use about the menstrual cycle. I think you had some really brilliant examples, throughout the past of some of the, some of the language around it that we wouldn't use today.
Well, I think it's interesting, though. I think we do use it indirectly or directly. And for me, as a linguist, when I read that data about how many women were suffering, I thought, okay, well, and I was a cultural linguist, I was like, I'm going to go back and read everything that was ever written about the menstrual cycle from the beginning of time. And for 1,500 years, I couldn't find anything from the onset of written language. So we spent a century and a half talking about all kinds of things except women's health and menstruation. And the first thing that I found, I'm not an anthropologist, so there may have been something else that I missed. There are texts in traditional Chinese medicine from the Qing dynasty, because that's where sort of reproductive acupuncture started. But, things that were commonly read by people, the first thing was in the book of Leviticus, said that thing is so vile. It's as vile as a menstruating woman or the devil. And second to that was, very shortly after that, Aristotle said in the 3rd century, women are the inferior species because they menstruate. And that continued to be the sort of prevailing medical theory about women and menstruation, that because they menstruated, they were somehow inferior, that during reproduction, the seed, the sperm carried the spirit and the intellect, but the woman only provided the serum, which is like the menstrual blood is what they thought, in which the seed can grow. Like, we're just the receptacle. And I think that, if you just, I think I'm not a male, so I can't speak to the self-esteem of men, because I think they're just completely different. My body, so I said, we're just different species. But, pretty much every person with a period and female that I know struggles in one way or the other with self-esteem, like pretty significantly, even the most powerful, badass CEOs. Right. And I was like, I think that when I read those two statements, I thought, of course, we don't value ourselves. Of course, we think we need to be somebody different than who we are. Of course, we think that we need sanitization. And it's kind of like if you ever go to therapy and you're like, I don't know why I'm so screwed up right now. I just can't figure it out. And then you tell the therapist the whole story, and the therapist replays it back to you, like, okay, so, your parents abandoned you when you were 7 years old. And then this bad thing happened. And then this bad thing happened. And this bad thing's happening right now. And you're like, you have all this, when you sort of hear the timeline again, you have all this self-compassion. Like, of course I'm having such a hard time. Of course I'm depressed. Like, who wouldn't be? And when I read all that data about sort of the language of menstruation across the generational conditioning of women and people with periods across 17 centuries, I thought, of course it's really hard for us to love ourselves. Of course, we're constantly trying to improve ourselves and modify ourselves, not for ourselves, but for, society. And I thought that was a really powerful starting point for the conversation around how do we take our power back. And I spend a lot of time on TikTok, and I do a live show every single day. And often there's 1,000 teenage girls there, and they're asking so many questions. And one of the most popular questions that gets literally asked every single day is, how in the hell am I going to tell my parent about this? And they're just like, so afraid and so ashamed. And so, like, you can tell they're just so embarrassed. And I always tell them, look, the first thing that we have to do is we have to put the past in the past. What we were conditioned to believe about ourselves because we menstruate was just a complete fabrication. I don't know if that was to try to control us, whether that was to out of society's own fear of us as menstruators, but it's not true, because the reality is that if you have a period, for the most part, you can make a human.
Mm-hmm.
You can make a human out of almost nothing. And to me, that elevates you to superhuman status.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just nothing to be ashamed about in that capacity. And we have to like own that relationship with like, I'm the future of our species, right? Mm-hmm. Without menstruators, our species cannot continue. And that is something that every girl and young person with a period can feel proud of. And so I always say, like, I'm writing a graphic novel right now called Becoming Superhuman, which is for all my girls from TikTok, because now I really know what their concerns are, you know. And the whole thing is in black and white. But as the girl in the comic book is, her name is Kiki, and as she starts to like find her superhuman power, it starts to switch to graphic, like, you know, bright, bold, superhuman, like comic book, 50s pop art.
Yeah.
And as the book progresses and she becomes her, you know, she's like owns her superhuman, it becomes in, you know, Technicolor.
And that sounds like a fantastic idea, and using the graphic novel format to get that message out there as well, you know, particularly for teenagers, just sounds perfect.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it's been a lot of fun. If there's any listeners out there who would be willing to share like any of their puberty stories, I'm collecting puberty stories right now. Just because what I realize is that all the puberty books and coming of age books for girls were mostly recipe books. It's like, here's your vagina, here's the penis, this is pubic hair, this is acne, this is a pad. And it was like the girls were like standing in, you know, like fields of flowers and wearing bows in their hair. And I'm like, I know these girls. This is not these girls. These girls are badasses. They're super current. They're interesting. You know, they're not like girls from the 50s, you know? And so why I wanted to write a graphic novel is because I actually wanted to tell the story of somebody going through puberty, and use humor so that the girls would actually be able to not feel so alone.
I think you're hinting there as well of like so many young girls going through that experience and maybe feeling alone and not knowing who to talk to about it.
Yeah, definitely. And just like, they don't even talk to their friends about it. Even when my daughter, you know, she was like 13 or 14 years old and she hadn't gotten her period yet. She's an athlete, so it wasn't surprising. But, you know, as a period expert, you know, I'm really like, have up in her period business all the time. And I was like, hey, so have your friends started their periods yet? And she's like, I don't know. And I said, well, don't you ask them? Or don't they say like, hold on, I got to get a tampon? She's like, no way. I have no idea who has their period. And I thought that was really interesting. I don't remember if I talked about it with my friends or not, but yeah, they'll say, how do I tell my friends I got my period? I'm like, you say, yo, I just turned into a fucking badass. I'm a superhuman now. I just got my period finally. Let's have a party.
So in terms of menstrual issues then, what are some of the most common kind of issues that people will experience that you work with?
You know, pretty much I always say like womb to tomb, you know, issues around puberty. Like we work with, you know, people who have precocious puberty, like people who are starting their period way too early, like at 5 years old and things like that. And then often when girls, the time they get their period, up until 20, they can have quite irregular and problematic periods that are easily corrected with Chinese herbal medicine, easily corrected, like shockingly. And they're often, you know, when they're not, you know, menstrual pain is the number one reason that girls miss school. And so when moms take their menstruating, you know, daughters and menstruators to the doctor for menstrual pain, the physicians really don't have a lot of resources. So often they're put on oral contraceptives, which can be very effective at managing the pain. I never advise it because the data are pretty conclusive that show that like teenage girls and oral contraceptives, it triples their risk for suicide and increases their risk for depression by over 80%. And more importantly, when they're having problems with their menstrual cycle, it's telling us this child needs something different in the way that we're caring for her.
Yeah, it's like a
So
signal, and then maybe those kind of responses are just covering up that signal.
exactly. So, lots of girls and young menstruators are in athletics. And so, like me, when, I was young, I was probably, I was definitely overtraining and probably under eating. Um, I grew up in an Italian family, so my mom cooked every single night, but still, um, you know, like girls will tell me like, oh, well, I only have 1 day of bleeding. Is that normal? And I was like,
Hmm.
well, no, what's healthy is 4 days of bleeding, soaking a tampon or a pad about every 4 hours. And if you have less, that tells us either digestion doesn't work efficiently, your diet is not robust enough to support a healthy menstrual cycle in terms of iron rich foods and nutrients, or you're overtraining.
Hmm.
Or fourth one is like underslept. So that, and often it's some combination of that. And so when we just use, so that person, what I found is the less bleeding that they have, the more PMS they have. And when you make more blood and address the underlying cause and make more blood, the PMS symptoms often will get better naturally.
Hmm.
But if you just use oral contraceptives to cover that up, then you've missed the opportunity to, like, if the person is subclinically anemic, that's harmful to our body,
Hmm.
right? Blood delivers oxygen and nutrients to every single cell in our body. And when we don't have enough of it, every system will suffer.
I know there are different kind of issues that come up, across the different age ranges.
It can be it's pretty much it's interesting because you have puberty and then you have perimenopause. And I
Hmm.
think I say puberty is the on ramping of hormones, and perimenopause, which starts at 35, goes to 50, is the down ramping of hormones. And those actually presentations look very similar.
Hmm.
Really bad PMS, really bad periods, and a lot of acne. And the same thing happens. Like women will say, at 35, they'll say, I don't know, my period's getting so bad. I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm stressed. I'm like, yeah, it's all of those factors. And then, the onset of endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and PMDD, can present at any time. It really just comes up. What happens is like you're healthy for a while, and then you stop being healthy for whatever reason, and then it presents. And often, Darren Harding always says it in the compounding effect. You're always compounding in one direction or the other every single day.
Hmm.
And if you're not intending to go in the direction you want, you're going in the direction you don't want. And the same is true with our health. You're either, he says you're getting dumber, you're getting smarter, you're getting kinder, you're getting meaner, you're getting healthier or less healthy. So I think that, often our body, like mine, was more resilient for a certain period of time, and then it can't tolerate the way that we're caring for it. And then we start to see, problems arise.
Hmm. What
And
is?
PMDD, I do want to just say something about PMDD because it's sort of a condition that not very many people know about, but a lot of people are really suffering really, really greatly from it.
Mhm. So
It
what
looks
does
and
that
feels
stand
like
for?
premenstrual dysmorphic disorder.
Okay.
And it looks like really crazy bad PMS.
Hmm.
It's a condition in which the person has very severe sensitivity to hormones. Pretty much the moment they ovulate and their hormones shift, they start having symptoms like the symptoms of PMS, but they last for the full 2 weeks. They last until they start menstruating. So 14 days, and multiply it by 10 to 100 times.
Hmm.
So 30% of the people with this condition will have a suicide attempt because of it.
Well, that's
One
like
of my,
half your lifetime, isn't it? If it's 2 weeks every month.
yeah, yeah. And most of them are like disabled by it. So
Yeah.
I talked to a woman who's using our products, and her 14-year-old, like as soon as she would ovulate, she would start cutting herself and trying to kill herself
Hmm.
for 2 straight weeks. And then like after she'd been in lockdown, she'd been in like mental institutions. They had her on every pharmaceutical, and she had met a colleague of mine. She's like, you should try Kirsten's PMS formula. And she emailed me at the end. She's like, this is the first time she didn't cut herself like in 2 years. Like she
Hmm.
goes, she still isn't great, but after 1 month, like I can see the darkness is lifting. And you know, often for those women, are prescribed either, medications for bipolar or antidepressants or oral contraceptives, which is the worst idea because what is an oral contraceptive but more
Hmm.
hormones? So these poor people have extreme hormone sensitivity. And like, hey, let's give you more hormones. What we have to do is like improve the function of the liver so that the liver can tolerate those hormones better. And when you do, you have life-changing improvement. Like literally in 1 to 2 months, you're like, I feel like I got my life back.
Yeah.
And when these people go to the doctor, so many women have told me like, yeah, my OB-GYN said that's not even a thing, PMDD, when it absolutely is like in the DSM-3 and, you know.
And I think you make the point, you know, you were saying about, you know, 80% of women are having issues around their menstrual cycle. But really you think that you have solutions to that can kind of bring most of those women to a point where they're not actually having to suffer in that way. So I'm wondering then, I think you've mentioned a couple of little things, but what does a healthy menstrual cycle look like?
Oh yeah. So this basically came from sort of a combination of the sort of underpinnings of the philosophy from Chinese medicine and then just my clinical experience because, you know, as a fertility specialist, I noticed that all the women who came to my clinic had periods that were just problematic in every single way. And that after about 3 to 5 months, they would take a particular shape, right? The characteristics and the basal temperatures. And then when they would get to this one particular that I'll tell you in just a second, they would start getting pregnant. And that's when I decided, okay, well, that's the ideal cycle because that's where infertile women become fertile. And if we look at that as an ultimate reflection of overall health, then we use that as our gold standard. So, and I would say 90% of people with periods can get here. So it's a, you know, having a 28-day cycle, regularly occurring 28-day cycle. You ovulate on cycle day 14 with good, clear, stretchy cervical discharge on cycle day 14 and a few days around. You don't have any PMS symptoms. There's 40 symptoms that can be associated with PMS. It's really anything that happens between ovulation and menstruation only. Mood changes, acne, bloating, fatigue, bowel changes, body aches, rashes, insomnia and anxiety, and then a whole bunch more, but those are the most common. Then when the period starts, they have 4 days of bleeding. They soak a tampon or a pad every 4 hours, not more, not less. They don't have any spotting. They don't have any cramping, no clotting, and the blood is fresh red. And people, when I tell them that, they literally look at me like I'm crazy. They're just like, that's just not even a thing. That's not possible. And I was like, if you do the work, like, you know, we as an acupuncturist, I made a lot of formulas for my patients in clinics, and, you know, we commercialized some of those to make them available to the, you know, to the public. But I always say, like, don't only lean on supplements. Like, you can actually, in Chinese medicine, they say the good doctor treats the patient, the great doctor treats society, but the master can make herself obsolete. And I'm always trying to make myself obsolete. And the people who invest in my endeavors are always trying to convince me not to do that because they say it's bad for business. And I was like, no, I don't care about that. If you understand how to read your menstrual cycle, if you understand that 1 day of if suddenly you're like, oh, all of a sudden I only have 1 day of bleeding, you're like, okay, well, I'm either over exercising, I'm not sleeping enough, I'm not managing my stress, digestion's out of whack, or I'm not eating well enough. Then ultimately you won't need the formulas that I created. If you just want to like not do any of that, you can take those forever and they will sort of keep you, you know, pretty symptom free forever. But I'd rather see people like use our formulas and use our technology to get to a place where they're good and then really double down. Because sometimes if you're suffering with PMDD 2 weeks out of the month, sometimes it's really hard to just start a whole new lifestyle habit. And so sometimes using Chinese herbs can be a way to get people out of crisis mode, so that all of a sudden they're like, okay, I think I can take on walking every day now. Okay, I think I can do 5 minutes of meditation. Okay, I think I can eat one more serving of vegetable. And if you do it in baby steps, it actually is not hard. And that's the technology that we're working on building to really help, you know, like a period tracker, collect all the data and then feed back. These are the problem areas and this is how you fix it. And we're actually doing, if anybody's interested, we just launched our first version of it for fertility patients. They're very motivated. So if you're somebody who's struggling to get pregnant, or you know somebody who is, if you go to Forever Brazen, I'm sure the website will be in the links, and click the fertility score, basically you go through the assessment. In the assessment, as you're filling out the assessment, it's like having a conversation with me. So this is how we're trying to design it. I'll ask you, how many days of bleeding do you have? And you say, I have 1 day of menstrual blood. Mm-hmm. And then the data pops up. Did you know that having 1 day of menstrual blood decreases the likelihood of conception by 50%? And then a short 10 or 15-second video of me pops up. This is why. Because if you only have 1 day of bleeding, then the lining is insufficient for implantation. So even if you can fertilize an embryo every single month, if there's not enough blood to support the development of the developing follicle embryo, then you have no chance of staying pregnant. Our job is to figure out why you don't have enough blood. And so after that, they get a report with all the findings. They get their conceivable score, and then they get a report of this is what you need to do to fix it.
So what would your recommendations be in terms of those lifestyle kind of tips? So if someone wants to try to have a healthy menstrual cycle like you're talking about, what kind of things can they do?
Well, for me, the key is personalization. People will always ask me like, oh, well, what herbs are good for periods, or what herbs are good for fertility? Like, people are always drinking red raspberry leaf tea. And like, that isn't going to do anything in what you can buy in the store. Because first of all, there's nothing that treats everything.
Yeah.
So if you have a period problem, we have to understand, like, not only what is your specific, do you have ovulatory problems? Do you have polycystic ovarian syndrome? Do you have really bad menstrual pain? Do you have, and like, even just in menstrual pain can be caused by too much of something like clotting, mm-hmm. or too little of something like not enough blood. Like when there's not enough blood, like in Chinese medicine, the blood doesn't, like when you have low blood volume, you also have low blood pressure and low heart rate. Mm-hmm. So the blood isn't circulating with as much velocity, so it tends to stagnate, and you see more cramping with that. Mm-hmm. But if you have something with low blood volume and clotting, and you're like, well, we just need to make more blood, but you make more blood and you haven't figured out why there's so much clotting, then you make more clots and you make the problem worse. Mm-hmm. So the trick is, that's why we're building technology. Like even when I was writing my book, Seeing Red, our editors were like, teach them how to do it. And I was like, I need an algorithm. It either has to have my brain sorting out all of these pieces, or can we teach technology to sort the pieces mm-hmm. out for the consumer, which is what we're doing on that fertility, the fertility offering right now. It'll be duplicated the same for period problems. So we're just like perfecting it in fertility.
Yeah. So there's just no kind of one size fits all approach to it.
No. So what the things that your body and that your, sorry, my dog is like, I'm like in my bathroom right now trying to have a quiet space for COVID podcast, right? The things that your menstrual cycle needs, it needs to be stress-free. Not stress-free, that seems like too much, but like if we're not mitigating the effects of stress on our body, that is unequivocally going to cause problems. Mm-hmm. Because when we're producing a lot of adrenaline, that signals the flight or fright mechanism, which tells our bodies like we're in danger. And at a subconscious level, I think that our hormones react in a way it's like it might not be the best time to get knocked up. Now, there's no data. There isn't a single study that shows that stress decreases fertility outcomes. Mm-hmm. But what stress does is it puts pressure on every single system so that they're performing suboptimally. And you combine that with other factors, that's where you get the impact. So mitigating stress, using mindfulness, like even in our study that we did at Conceivable, we were able to increase the likelihood of natural conception by 270% using the system that we're talking about. And our investors were like, what was the thing that got them knocked up? Like, what was it? Was it with the herbs? Was it diet? Was it, And what was really fascinating is like, it's not one thing. The thing that was able to produce such outstanding results was that we didn't look at one thing. We diagnosed the problem as deeply as possible, down to the bottom, and then we customized an intervention specifically for that person. So it wasn't one thing, it was the system that got them pregnant. So when we look back at the data of all the interventions,
a young girl
they were almost all
told me that her
equally
family
weighted
was
in their
too poor
likelihood
to
to
afford
increase the
menstrual
likelihood of
supplies,
conception,
and that
except one, which was
she
mindfulness,
was looking in the
which
trash can
outperformed the others by
in
5%. So
school
not a
bathrooms
lot,
for used
but everything else, even
supplies,
food
and then
and Chinese,
recycling them.
customized
She wanted to know if
Chinese
she could
herbs,
get
they
an
should have
infection.
outperformed that.
And I was
Really
so
showed me that
moved
like
by
our mind
that
is actually
desperation
to like need a supply so badly that you'd be willing to dig through a trash can full of dirty menstrual supplies and try to recycle the least dirty ones. And I know that's revolting, but I'm only sharing that to me, it was such a sucker punch of how important this is. And as I dug into the research, it turned out that 500 million people with periods every single month don't have menstrual supplies. Mm-hmm. And if you're a menstruator, if you could just even imagine not having, supplies for one day, and especially if you only have one pair of jeans. And so I decided that I wanted to change that. And currently there's a lot of period poverty equity, organizations that are, getting pads and supplies to people all over the world, which are doing great work. But I thought if there's 500 million every month, we can never solve it with pads. Mm-hmm. We have to use something more sustainable that doesn't need a lot of water, because reusable pads or reusable underwear, they require a lot of water to get clean. And many people don't have a place to go wash those that's private and, won't be weird. So anyway, so I started this project called the $5 cup. I realized that in the US, a cup costs about $40, which is really expensive considering that I was able to source the same cup for just under $1. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, I'm going to sell cups at Brazen for $5. And then with the proceeds from that, the $4, well, it's really like $3 because of shipping and stuff. We're going to give 3 cups away to people in need, both in the US and globally. And so whether you support, what we're doing at Brazen, please, today is Menstrual Hygiene Day, World Menstrual Hygiene Day. If you have an extra $1, an extra $2, if you can donate anywhere to help someone in need have menstrual supplies, you'll be making a difference like you can't even imagine. You may make the difference of whether that young person goes to school or work that day. So it can have a huge impact. If you want to learn more about it for us, you can just visit us at our website, and it'll be in the show links.
Yeah, and I should say, when this comes out, World Menstrual Day will be in the past.
Yes,
obviously, but
true.
Still go and check out Brazen. And so, Kirsten, for people to do that, just before we finish, can you tell people, you've got your book, you've got your companies. Can you let us know how we can find out about those things?
Sure. So you can visit our website at foreverbrazen.com, and there's links all over the place for all of that information. You can see, just click on the $5 cup. You can visit, and that chat bot that's on that website goes actually to my cell phone. Mm-hmm. So that's like the hotline to my cell phone. Doesn't ring. Never call me. I'll never answer my phone. But it does send me a little text message that you're trying to get in touch with me and get back in touch with you. If you want to participate in our community, we're about 250,000 strong on TikTok. Just look for The Period Expert. Every day we have a live show at 4 Central, which is, I guess, y'all's time, about 10 p.m. So a little bit late, but definitely worth a conversation. And if you have any questions, if you're trying to get pregnant, definitely go to Brazen and click on the fertility score and report. You will have information like you never thought before, and for very cheap, for $40. It's like a steal. Again, because my whole thing is like, I had a very comfortable career as a clinician, and now what I'm trying to do is democratize access to both fertility care, period care, and menstrual supplies.
Yeah, which is really important, and hopefully this helps get the word out there.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm excited. I'm so happy to get to have finally had a conversation together.
Yeah, me too. I'm really happy. It's a really important topic, and I think you are a great ambassador for it. And I know my friend Jem will be happy that we've done this as well. So, Kirsten,
Yay, Jem!
Kirsten, thanks very much for your time. That's really, really interesting, really fascinating. And I hope people go and check out your book and Brazen and really kind of start helping themselves and educate themselves around the topic.
I love it. Thank you. And just drop me a note and say hi.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
I hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode. Remember to rate and review the show on your podcast app and spread the word. And get in touch on Twitter or through the website and let me know what topics you'd like to hear in the future. Bye for now.